Welcome to Sherlock's Casebook, where every mystery has a story, and every story hides a secret. Step into the world of deduction, suspense, and untold cases of Sherlock Holmes. Are you ready to uncover the truth? It was on an unusually fog-laden evening in October of the year 1893 that I, Dr. John Watson, found myself once more in the familiar sitting room of 221B Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes lounged in his armchair, draped in his dressing gown, his keen eyes fixed upon the shifting tendrils of pipe smoke that curled toward the ceiling. He had been in a state of apparent idleness for the better part of the week, a condition that often left him irritable and restless. I deduce, Watson, that your day has been one of tedious monotony, Holmes remarked suddenly, his sharp gaze turning to me. I started slightly, for I had only just seated myself and had not yet spoken a word. "And what leads you to such a conclusion?" I asked. "The absence of your usual enthusiasm, the fact that you did not stop at your club, and the ink stain upon your cuff suggest you spent the afternoon composing one of your tales rather than engaging in any invigorating activity." He gave a slight smirk. "I trust my reasoning is sound." I chuckled. "As always, Holmes, but I suspect you may soon have the excitement you crave." No sooner had I spoken than a sharp rap sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, her expression mildly flustered. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," she announced. "He insisted the matter was of great urgency." "Show him in," Holmes said, his interest piqued. A moment later, a tall, gaunt man stepped into the room, his face lined with worry. He was well dressed, but bore the air of someone who had not slept in days. Removing his hat with a trembling hand, he introduced himself as Mr. Gerald Fawcett, solicitor to the esteemed Lord Percival Ashcombe. "I fear I must beg for your immediate assistance, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice wavering. "A most dreadful and inexplicable event has taken place." Holmes leaned forward. "Pray, be precise." "My client's son, Reginald Ashcombe, heir to the Ashcombe estate and fortune, has vanished without a trace. Disappeared from his own home in the dead of night, his bed undisturbed, his possessions untouched, and not a soul in the household heard a sound." Holmes steepled his fingers. "Curious indeed. A man does not simply vanish. Tell me, Mr. Fawcett, are there enemies of the Ashcombe family? A ransom note, perhaps?" "No, Mr. Holmes. There is no demand for ransom, no signs of a struggle. It is as though he walked out of existence." Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "Then, Mr. Fawcett, you may count upon my services. Watson, we depart for Ashcombe Manor at once." The journey to Ashcombe Manor was a sombre one. The fog, which had clung to London with such tenacity, seemed to follow us out of the city, thickening as we made our way through the countryside. I sat beside Holmes in the carriage, watching his mind work behind his unreadable expression. It was rare for him to remain silent for long, and I was certain that he was already piecing together the scant details Mr. Fawcett had provided. "The peculiar nature of this disappearance, Watson, troubles me," Holmes said suddenly, breaking the silence. "To vanish without a trace is no simple feat. It suggests a methodical plan, or more likely, a mistake in the planning, which I shall soon uncover." I had no reply, knowing that Holmes's deductions often surpassed my own understanding, yet I could not help but feel a sense of unease. The absence of a struggle, the lack of any tangible clue. Such circumstances did not make for a straightforward case. As the carriage rumbled along the winding road, I observed Holmes closely. His sharp eyes were distant, his brow furrowed in concentration. In moments like these, when he appeared consumed by a problem, he seemed almost otherworldly, less a man than a force of nature, driven by the puzzle before him. We arrived at Ashcombe Manor well past twilight. The estate was an imposing structure, a sprawling stone edifice flanked by neatly trimmed gardens and a row of tall, swaying trees. The mansion seemed to loom against the dimming sky, casting long shadows over the grounds. We were greeted at the entrance by Mrs. Marjorie Hawke, the housekeeper, a stout woman in her 50s whose worried eyes betrayed the gravity of the situation. "It's terrible, Mr. Holmes," she said, leading us inside. "The master is beside himself. We have searched everywhere, and still no sign of the young master. The manor's interior was as grand as its exterior. Rich wood panelling, portraits of long-deceased Ashcombe ancestors, and a cold, imposing silence that seemed to permeate every corner." Mrs. Hawke led us through a series of corridors, finally stopping at a well-appointed bedroom door. "This is where Master Reginald slept," she said, her voice low. I don't know what to make of it. The room was locked from the inside, yet the key was found on the bedside table. Holmes's gaze flickered over the door as he approached. His long fingers brushed against the wooden frame before he carefully examined the lock. Interesting. No signs of forced entry. And yet the key... He paused, his lips thinning into a line. The door was locked from the inside, but there are no marks on the key to suggest it was hastily removed. He stepped into the room, his sharp eyes scanning every inch of the space. The bed appeared untouched, save for the perfectly arranged pillows. A small desk sat against one wall, papers neatly stacked, with a single pen poised as if it had been set down only moments before. The windows were closed tight, the heavy drapes drawn to shut out the creeping night. Mrs. Hawke, were there any visitors or unusual occurrences in the days leading up to Master Reginald's disappearance? "Die Burkischel?" Holmes asked, not turning from his examination. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable under the detective's penetrating stare. "There was a gentleman who came to see Master Reginald 2 nights before his disappearance. A Mr. Edmund Worth, a distant relative of the family. He stayed for dinner, but left early the following morning. I don't believe he was here long enough to be of any concern, but—" She trailed off. Holmes turned sharply toward her, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Edmund Worth, you say? A man of means?" I believe so, yes. He was well-dressed, but not overly so, and his manner was polite, though." She hesitated again. "He gave me a strange impression, as if he were waiting for something, or someone." I could feel the tension in the air as Holmes continued his inspection, his mind already working. He walked toward the desk and picked up a letter that had been placed there with precision, the wax seal still intact. Without opening it, he turned to Mrs. Hawke. "Where is Mr. Worth now?" "He left this morning, Mr. Holmes. I've no idea where he went. He did not speak of his plans." Holmes nodded absently, his fingers tracing the edges of the letter. "Interesting, Watson. Very interesting. I confess, Holmes, I fail to see the connection between Mr. Worth and the young heir's disappearance." I felt my confusion growing. Holmes paused for a moment, turning to me with a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "That, my dear Watson, is precisely why I have come here. Mr. Worth is, I suspect, the key to this enigma." I opened my mouth to ask further questions, but Holmes was already moving toward the door, his mind clearly several steps ahead. "Let us return to Mr. Fawcett's office," Holmes said. "I believe a few questions need to be answered before we proceed." As we made our way back to the carriage, I could not help but feel the weight of the mystery growing heavier. The vanishing of Lord Ashcombe's heir, the strange letter, the elusive Mr. Worth. Everything seemed to be leading us deeper into a labyrinth of deception. "Watson, I am convinced that Reginald Ashcombe is not simply missing," Holmes said, his voice low and contemplative. "He is being hidden, and perhaps by someone much closer than we might first suspect." I could not help but shiver at the thought. The journey back to London was undertaken with little conversation. Holmes sat in deep contemplation, his fingers steepled before him, eyes half closed in a state I recognized well. His mind was working, sifting through possibilities, eliminating impossibilities. I knew better than to interrupt him when he was thus engaged, and so I turned my own thoughts to the case. The locked room, the undisturbed bed, the absence of a struggle. These were peculiar enough. But the introduction of Mr. Edmund Worth, the mysterious visitor, added a new layer of intrigue. Who was he to the Ashcombe family? And why had Holmes seized upon his presence with such interest? At last, as the lights of London flickered into view through the mist, Holmes stirred. "Watson, you remarked earlier that you saw no connection between Mr. Worth and the disappearance." "Yes, Holmes. He was a visitor, nothing more. Surely we must first determine how young Reginald vanished before leaping to conclusions about who might be responsible." Holmes gave a faint smile. "An admirable adherence to logic, Watson, but an incomplete one. Consider, if a man were to vanish from his locked room, what are the possible explanations?" I thought for a moment. He might have left voluntarily. "Indeed, but we have no evidence of such an intention. His personal effects were untouched, and there was no note of departure." "Then he was taken," I said, "but that presents the difficulty of the locked door." "Precisely," Holmes murmured, "which suggests one of two possibilities. Either the door was locked after his disappearance, meaning an intruder had access to the key, or it was never locked at all, and the appearance of a locked room mystery is an illusion." I frowned, but Mrs. Hawke said the key was found inside the room. How could an intruder have placed it there without entering? Holmes tapped his fingers against his knee. "That, my dear Watson, is what we must determine." Upon returning to Mr. Gerald Fawcett's office, we found the solicitor pacing anxiously before his desk. He greeted us with evident relief. "Mr. Holmes, I trust your visit to the manor has yielded some insight?" Holmes removed his gloves and seated himself with deliberate calm. "Mr. Fawcett, I require information. You are the solicitor for Lord Ashcombe, are you not?" "Yes." "And as such, you are privy to the details of the Ashcombe inheritance?" Fawcett hesitated. "To an extent, yes." "Then tell me," Holmes said, his gaze sharp, "who stands to benefit from Reginald Ashcombe's disappearance?" Fawcett paled. "Mr. Holmes, you surely do not suspect foul play?" "I suspect nothing, sir. I merely seek facts." Fawcett swallowed. If Reginald were permanently absent, the estate would pass to the next male relative of direct lineage. "And who is that?" Fawcett hesitated. "Mr. Edmund Worth." A silence fell over the room. I felt my heart quicken. Holmes had already suspected as much, but to have it confirmed. "And what of the letter found in Reginald's room?" Holmes continued. "Who was it from?" Fawcett looked startled. "Letter? I was not aware of any letter." Holmes retrieved it from his coat pocket, still sealed. It was left untouched on Reginald's desk. I found it odd that a young man of intelligence would receive correspondence and not open it. He turned it over in his fingers. "The seal bears the crest of Lord Ashcombe. Can you confirm this is genuine?" Fawcett took it. His brow furrowed. "Yes, it is Lord Ashcombe's seal." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps you should deliver it to him yourself." Holmes smiled thinly. "Indeed I shall. But tell me, when did Mr. Worth arrive at the manor?" "2 nights before Reginald disappeared." "And when did he leave?" "The morning after." "Interesting," Holmes murmured. He leaned back, eyes gleaming with intrigue. "Tell me, Mr. Fawcett, does Mr. Worth reside in London?" "Yes, he keeps a residence in Mayfair." Holmes nodded. "Then I believe our next visit shall be to Mr. Edmund Worth." As we stepped back into the fog-laden streets, I could contain myself no longer. "Holmes, do you believe Edmund Worth responsible?" Holmes gave me a sidelong glance. "My dear Watson, I believe nothing yet, but I know that Mr. Worth has much to explain." I shivered as we stepped into a waiting, hansom cab. The case was beginning to take shape, but something told me we were only at the beginning of the puzzle. The hansom cab rattled through the gaslit streets of London as we made our way toward Mayfair, where Mr. Edmund Worth resided. Holmes sat in his usual silence, his fingers drumming lightly against his knee. I could sense the shift in his mood. His mind was sharpening, sifting through possibilities, preparing for the confrontation ahead. "Holmes," I said at last, "do you believe Worth capable of harming young Reginald?" Holmes tilted his head slightly, but did not turn toward me. "A man's capacity for wrongdoing, Watson, is often determined not by his nature, but by his circumstances. We know that Worth stands to inherit should Reginald Ashcombe remain missing. That alone is motive. But that does not mean he is guilty." "Precisely, Watson. And yet, when motive aligns with opportunity, the prudent investigator takes notice." He tapped his fingers together. "Still, the matter is far from settled. There are too many unknowns." The cab came to a halt in front of a stately townhouse on Brook Street. Unlike the grand, imposing Ashcombe Manor, Worth's residence was modest by aristocratic standards, though still befitting a man of means. A discreet brass plaque bore his name beside the door. Holmes wasted no time in rapping sharply upon it. A moment later, a butler of thin frame and severe expression opened the door. He eyed us warily. "Mr. Worth is not receiving visitors at this hour," he announced curtly. Holmes did not flinch. "Inform him that Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson wish to speak with him on a most urgent matter." The butler hesitated, then disappeared inside. A few minutes passed before the door was opened wider, and we were admitted into a richly furnished sitting room. The walls were lined with shelves of books, and a decanter of brandy sat untouched on a side table. Seated in a high-backed chair near the fireplace was Edmund Worth. He was a man of about 40, with dark, neatly combed hair and a face of severe angles. His expression was cool, his posture relaxed, but his eyes, sharp and wary, betrayed an underlying tension. "I must admit, gentlemen," Worth began, "I was not expecting company at this hour. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Holmes stepped forward, his keen gaze locking onto Worth's. "You entertained Reginald Ashbourne at the Manor 2 nights before his disappearance, did you not?" Worth's brow lifted slightly. "I did. Is that a crime?" "No, but it is certainly of interest. You were among the last to see him." Worth exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. "I see. Then I presume you believe me involved in my cousin's unfortunate absence." Holmes smiled faintly. "I believe nothing, Mr. Worth. I simply follow the facts." Worth studied Holmes for a moment before responding. "Then let me state my position plainly. Yes, I visited the manor. Yes, I dined with Reginald. And yes, I departed the following morning, as I had business in town. But if you are suggesting I had anything to do with his disappearance, you are gravely mistaken." Holmes tilted his head. "Mistaken, perhaps, but not yet convinced. Tell me, what was the nature of your conversation with Reginald that evening?" Worth hesitated just a fraction too long before answering. "We spoke of family matters, nothing of importance." "Yet important enough for you to travel to Ashcombe Manor." Worth's lips thinned. "I had personal affairs to discuss with Lord Ashcombe." Holmes nodded slowly. "And did Reginald seem troubled? Anxious?" Again the hesitation. "No more than usual." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Ah, then he was troubled?" Worth's jaw clenched slightly. "You are twisting my words, Mr. Holmes." Holmes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Words, Mr. Worth, are often more revealing than their speaker intends. You see, I find it peculiar that Reginald vanished immediately after your visit. I also find it peculiar that you left early the next morning, before most of the household had risen." Worth's fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair. "Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes leaned forward, slightly. "I am merely observing, Mr. Worth, and observation often leads to truth." A tense silence filled the room. I could see a flicker of something in Worth's expression. Anger, perhaps, or something deeper. At last, Worth exhaled, sharply, and stood. "I have entertained your questions, Mr. Holmes, but unless you have an accusation backed by evidence, I see no reason to continue this conversation." Holmes inclined his head. "Very well, Mr. Worth. We shall trouble you no further." With that, we took our leave. As soon as we stepped onto the pavement outside, I turned to Holmes. "He was hiding something," I said. Holmes gave a small nod. "Oh, unquestionably, Watson. But the question remains, what?" I frowned. "Do you believe he is responsible for Reginald's disappearance?" Holmes's expression was unreadable. I believe he is involved, though in what capacity I am not yet certain." He glanced up at the night sky. "But one thing is clear. Mr. Edmund Worth is a man in a great deal of distress." As we climbed into the waiting cab, I could not help but feel that we had stepped into a web of deceit. and that the real mystery had only just begun. The night air had turned sharp by the time we arrived back at 221B Baker Street. Holmes said little as he shrugged off his coat and took his customary place by the fireplace, his hands steepled, his gaze distant. I had long since learned to recognize this mood, the peculiar stillness that settled upon him when his mind was turning over a problem of considerable complexity. I, on the other hand, could not contain my thoughts. "Holmes," I said, pacing the room, "we have motive and suspicion, but we are still without evidence." Worth's nervousness was evident, yet we cannot say for certain that he is guilty of anything. Holmes did not look at me. "True, Watson, but guilt is an elusive thing. It does not always present itself openly. A man may act in a guilty manner even when innocent, and another may seem innocent while bearing the blackest of crimes upon his conscience." I stopped pacing. "Then what next?" Holmes finally stirred. "We must reconsider the facts." He stood and moved to his desk, retrieving the sealed letter we had taken from Reginald's room at Ashcombe Manor. He turned it over in his fingers, his eyes narrowing slightly. "There is something here, Watson. Something that does not fit." I leaned forward. "You believe the letter holds the key to his disappearance?" "I believe it holds a message left unread, and that is a curious thing indeed." Without another word, Holmes fetched his magnifying glass and examined the unbroken seal of Lord Ashcombe. After a long pause, he murmured, "Fascinating." I waited, but he did not elaborate. Instead, he set the letter aside and reached for his pipe. "This, my dear Watson, is the kind of silence that speaks volumes." Before I could press him further, there was a sudden knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson, our landlady, bustled in with a slight frown. "A messenger, Mr. Holmes," she said, "left this for you just now." She handed him a small envelope, unmarked, save for his name, scrawled in neat, deliberate script. Holmes took it with an unreadable expression, then nodded to Mrs. Hudson, who disappeared back down the stairs. I moved to his side as he broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet within. He read it once, then again, his brows drawing together slightly. "What does it say?" I asked impatiently. Holmes handed me the note. The message was simple, yet chilling in its implication. "Mr. Holmes, cease your inquiries. The Ashcombe heir is beyond your reach." There was no signature. I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. It means, Watson," Holmes said quietly, "that we are getting too close to the truth." I swallowed. "Do you think Reginald is alive?" Holmes's gaze was fixed upon the note, his mind working rapidly. Then, quite suddenly, his expression shifted, his lips curling into the faintest hint of a smile. "Watson," he murmured, "I believe we have just received our most valuable clue yet." The note lay between us on the table, its simple warning carrying a weight that neither of us could ignore. I watched as Holmes sat motionless in his chair, his fingers steepled, his expression one of quiet calculation. "This changes matters, Watson," he said at last, his voice calm, yet edged with a peculiar intensity. "Until now, we had only a vanished heir. Now, we have an invisible hand at work, a force willing to warn and likely to act should we venture too close." I exhaled slowly. "Then we are dealing with something far more dangerous than a simple disappearance." Holmes nodded. "Indeed, And that is precisely why we must press forward. Before I could respond, there came another knock at the door, this one urgent, insistent. Holmes shot me a glance before rising swiftly to answer. The door swung open to reveal Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, his usually composed face betraying a rare expression of urgency. "Holmes, I need you," he said, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. "There's been another crime." Holmes remained impassive. "Go on." Lestrade took a breath. Gerald Fawcett has been found dead. A heavy silence filled the room. My stomach turned. "The solicitor?" I asked. "The same." Lestrade nodded grimly. "A housekeeper found him in his office late this evening. A single gunshot to the chest. No sign of forced entry." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And the gun? Nowhere to be found." Holmes moved swiftly, retrieving his coat and hat. "Lestrade, you shall take us to Fawcett's office at once." Lestrade hesitated, then nodded. As we stepped outside, into the cold London night, I could not suppress the sense of growing danger. A missing heir, a cryptic warning, and now a man dead. Whatever truth Holmes was seeking, it was becoming abundantly clear. Someone would kill to keep it hidden. The hansom cab sped through the gaslit streets of London, its wheels rattling over the cobblestones as we made haste toward Gerald Fawcett's office. Holmes sat with his arms folded, his expression unreadable. Lestrade, seated opposite him, cast sidelong glances at my companion, no doubt hoping for some pronouncement of immediate insight. But Holmes merely stared ahead, his fingers twitching slightly, a sure sign that his mind was racing. "It is no coincidence," he murmured at last. "First, Reginald Ashbourne vanishes. Then comes the anonymous warning. And now, the very man who handled the Ashbourne estate's legal affairs is dead." Lestrade cleared his throat. "Murdered," he corrected. "Someone shot him in his own office, Holmes. No witnesses, no sign of forced entry. The room was locked from the inside." Holmes exhaled. "A locked room mystery, is it? Intriguing." The cab pulled up outside Fawcett's office on Chancery Lane. The building was dark, save for the glow of lanterns flickering beyond a second-story window. We stepped into the dimly lit hallway, where a constable stood guard. "Upstairs, sir," the man said, nodding toward the staircase. We ascended to the office, where the crime scene awaited us. The scent of gunpowder still lingered faintly in the air. Papers lay scattered across the desk, and a leather armchair sat ominously turned. Away from the door, its occupant slumped lifelessly. Gerald Fawcett was dead. The solicitor's body bore a single gunshot wound to the chest, his head lolling to one side. Holmes strode forward, his eyes flitting across the room. Lestrade sighed. "As you can see, Holmes, the room was locked. From the inside, no sign of a struggle, no weapon." Holmes murmured, "Curious." I moved closer, my medical training compelling me to examine the body. He was shot at close range. Death would have been near instantaneous. Holmes had already turned his attention elsewhere. He moved toward the desk, brushing his fingers lightly over the scattered papers. Then, quite suddenly, he paused. "What is it?" I asked. Holmes bent closer. "Observe, Watson, this ink is still wet." He held up a single sheet of parchment. Fawcett was writing something at the moment of his death. Lestrade leaned in. "And what does it say?" Holmes turned the paper so we could see, Scrawled hastily across the page were 3 words: "Ask Worth everything." A chill passed through me. Edmund Worth. Holmes nodded. "It seems, gentlemen, that our friend Mr. Worth is more entangled in this mystery than he would have us believe." Lestrade straightened. "We should bring him in for questioning at once." Holmes held up a hand. "Not yet, Lestrade. There is still one missing piece." He turned toward the fireplace, where a pile of ashes smouldered faintly. Kneeling, he sifted through them with the end of his walking stick. After a moment, he retrieved something, a fragment of partially burned paper. He held it up to the light. Though most of it had been reduced to cinders, a few words remained visible. Safe. Hidden in. Holmes smiled faintly. "Gentlemen, I believe Fawcett died trying to protect something. Or someone." He straightened. "And that means Reginald Ashbourne may still be alive." Lestrade's eyes widened. "You think the heir is being hidden?" Holmes nodded. "The key to this puzzle lies in what Fawcett knew, and what he attempted to destroy before he was silenced." He exhaled. "This is no simple inheritance dispute, Watson. This is a conspiracy." A silence fell over the room. The stakes had shifted once again. Holmes turned to Lestrade. "Inspector, I believe it is time for us to pay Edmund Worth another visit." And with that, we descended into the fog-drenched streets, aware that we were being drawn ever closer to the heart of a deadly secret. The journey to Edmund Worth's residence was marked by an uneasy silence. The gas lamps flickered dimly along the streets as our hansom cab carried us through the cold London night. Holmes sat forward slightly, his eyes half closed, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee, a sign that his mind was already constructing the final shape of the puzzle. Lestrade, sitting beside me, cleared his throat. The hansom cab sped through the gaslit streets of London, its wheels rattling over the cobblestones as we made haste toward Gerald Fawcett's office. Holmes sat with his arms folded, his expression unreadable. Lestrade, seated opposite him, cast sidelong glances at my companion, no doubt hoping for some pronouncement of immediate insight. But Holmes merely stared ahead, his fingers twitching slightly, a sure sign that his mind was racing. "It is no coincidence," he murmured at last. "First, Reginald Ashbourne vanishes. Then comes the anonymous warning. And now, the very man who handled the Ashbourne estate's legal affairs is dead." Lestrade cleared his throat. "Murdered," he corrected. "Someone shot him in his own office, Holmes. No witnesses, no sign of forced entry. The room was locked from the inside." Holmes exhaled. "A locked room mystery, is it? Intriguing." The cab pulled up outside Fawcett's office on Chancery Lane. The building was dark, save for the glow of lanterns flickering beyond a second-story window. We stepped into the dimly lit hallway, where a constable stood guard. "Upstairs, sir," the man said, nodding toward the staircase. We ascended to the office, where the crime scene awaited us. The scent of gunpowder still lingered faintly in the air. Papers lay scattered across the desk, and a leather armchair sat ominously turned. Away from the door, its occupant slumped lifelessly. Gerald Fawcett was dead. The solicitor's body bore a single gunshot wound to the chest, his head lolling to one side. Holmes strode forward, his eyes flitting across the room. Lestrade sighed. "As you can see, Holmes, The room was locked. From the inside, no sign of a struggle, no weapon. Holmes murmured, "Curious." I moved closer, my medical training compelling me to examine the body. He was shot at close range. Death would have been near instantaneous. Holmes had already turned his attention elsewhere. He moved toward the desk, brushing his fingers lightly over the scattered papers. Then, quite suddenly, he paused. "What is it?" I asked. Holmes bent closer. "Observe, Watson. This ink is still wet." He held up a single sheet of parchment. Fawcett was writing something at the moment of his death. Lestrade leaned in. "And what does it say?" Holmes turned the paper so we could see. Scrawled hastily across the page were 3 words: "Ask Worth everything." A chill passed through me. Edmund Worth. Holmes nodded. "It seems, gentlemen, that our friend Mr. Worth is more entangled in this mystery than he would have us believe." Lestrade straightened. "We should bring him in for questioning at once." Holmes held up a hand. "Not yet, Lestrade. There is still one missing piece." He turned toward the fireplace, where a pile of ashes smouldered faintly. Kneeling, he sifted through them with the end of his walking stick. After a moment, he retrieved something, a fragment of partially burned paper. He held it up to the light. Though most of it had been reduced to cinders, a few words remained visible. Safe. Hidden in. Holmes smiled faintly. "Gentlemen, I believe Fawcett died trying to protect something. Or someone." He straightened. "And that means Reginald Ashbourne may still be alive." Lestrade's eyes widened. "You think the heir is being hidden?" Holmes nodded. "The key to this puzzle lies in what Fawcett knew, and what he attempted to destroy before he was silenced." He exhaled. "This is no simple inheritance dispute, Watson. This is a conspiracy." A silence fell over the room. The stakes had shifted once again. Holmes turned to Lestrade. "Inspector, I believe it is time for us to pay Edmund Worth another visit." And with that, we descended into the fog-drenched streets, aware that we were being drawn ever closer to the heart of a deadly secret. The journey to Edmund Worth's residence was marked by an uneasy silence. The gas lamps flickered dimly along the streets as our hansom cab carried us through the cold London night. Holmes sat forward slightly, his eyes half closed, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee, a sign that his mind was already constructing the final shape of the puzzle. Lestrade, sitting beside me, cleared his throat. "Holmes, do you truly believe Worth is behind all this?" Holmes exhaled slowly. "Worth is not the architect, Lestrade. He is the gatekeeper. He holds the final piece of information, whether he is aware of it or not." The cab rolled to a stop before a modest townhouse in Kensington, where a single gaslight burned in the window. Holmes stepped out first, his sharp gaze sweeping across the building. "The house is dark, save for one room," he murmured. "Either Worth is expecting us, or he has already received another visitor." Lestrade knocked firmly on the door. A long silence followed. Then, just as we were about to try again, the door creaked open. Edmund Worth stood before us. His face was pale, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. He took in the 3 of us with a wary glance before stepping aside. "You'd best come in." We followed him into a well-appointed sitting room. its bookshelves lined with legal volumes. Worth moved to a decanter, his hands trembling slightly as he poured himself a drink. "I assume you've come about Fawcett," he said, his voice hollow. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "So you've heard?" Worth let out a bitter chuckle. "London whispers fast, Mr. Holmes, and when men like Fawcett begin to die, one knows that secrets are no longer safe." He took a long sip, then set the glass down. "So, tell me, what do you wish to know?" Holmes stepped forward, his voice level. "Let us dispense with pleasantries, Mr. Worth. Where is Reginald Ashbourne?" Worth stiffened. His eyes darted toward the window, as if weighing the decision to flee. But Holmes caught it. "Do not waste time with deception," Holmes continued. "We know that Fawcett was protecting something or someone. Before he died, he left us a message. Ask Worth everything." "That was not a suggestion, Mr. Worth. That was a directive. Fawcett trusted you, and now so must we." A heavy silence followed. Then, with a shuddering breath, Worth sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. "God help me," he muttered. "You don't understand. I had no choice." Holmes remained unmoving. "Explain." Worth swallowed hard. "Reginald Ashbourne is alive." A thrill of shock passed through me. Lestrade let out a quiet curse, but Holmes remained composed. "Where?" he asked simply. Worth hesitated, then glanced at the bookshelf behind him. With trembling fingers, he pressed against a hidden latch. A faint click sounded, and a small panel slid open, revealing a folded document. Holmes stepped forward and retrieved it. Unfolding the parchment, his eyes scanned its contents before a slow, knowing smile touched his lips. "Well, well," he murmured. "It appears the heir did not vanish of his own accord, after all." I peered over his shoulder. The document was a legal affidavit, signed by Gerald Fawcett and Reginald Ashbourne himself. Lestrade frowned. "What is this?" Holmes turned to face us. "Proof," he said, "that Reginald Ashbourne was abducted, and that the crime was orchestrated by someone far closer to the Ashbourne estate than we suspected." He folded the document and slipped it into his coat. "Gentlemen, the time has come for us to return to Ashbourne Manor. The true villain of this tale is waiting for us there." And with that, the game was set for its final move. The return to Ashbourne Manor was met with an air of impending resolution. The darkness hung heavy over the estate, the cold night air thick with mist as we approached the towering iron gates. A single light flickered in one of the upper rooms, a beacon in the gloom. Holmes, as always, was a step ahead. "Watson, Lestrade, remain close," he murmured as we approached the grand entrance. "Our culprit will soon know they have lost, and cornered beasts are prone to desperate acts." Lestrade knocked sharply. The butler, Mr. Price, opened the door with his usual impassive expression, but I did not miss the flicker of nervous recognition in his eyes as he saw us. Holmes took note of it as well. "The household is still awake?" he asked casually. "Yes, sir," Price replied, clearing his throat. "Lady Ashbourne is in the drawing-room. Shall I inform her of your arrival?" "No need," Holmes said, stepping past him without waiting for an invitation. "We shall see her directly." Inside, the grand hall was eerily silent. As we moved toward the drawing-room, I could not shake the feeling of unseen eyes watching us from the shadows. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe sat by the fireplace, her posture regal, her gaze cool as we entered. She was as composed as ever, her delicate hands resting in her lap. "Mr. Holmes?" she greeted, her voice smooth. "I assume you bring news?" Holmes smiled thinly. "Indeed, Lady Ashcombe. The mystery that has shrouded your son's disappearance is now resolved." A flicker of something, fear perhaps, crossed her face before she quickly masked it. "You have found Reginald." Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped toward the fireplace and turned his sharp gaze upon her. "Tell me, Lady Ashcombe," he said, "what do you believe is a greater crime, abduction or betrayal?" The room fell deathly silent. A tension coiled in the air like a drawn bowstring. Lady Ashcombe's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Holmes sighed. "I mean, my lady, that it was you who arranged for your son to disappear." A gasp escaped me. Lestrade swore under his breath. But Lady Ashcombe's expression remained frozen, as if carved from marble. Holmes continued. "You orchestrated his abduction, had him secreted away, and ensured his absence would be long enough for his inheritance to fall under your control. But your solicitor, Gerald Fawcett, was not as loyal as you believed. He knew the truth and sought to protect Reginald, and for that he was silenced." Her fingers clenched, her facade finally cracking. "That is absurd." Holmes tilted his head. "Is it? Then tell me, Lady Ashcombe, if you had nothing to hide, why did your trusted solicitor leave a message before his death, instructing us to ask Edmund Worth everything? Why did Worth possess a legal affidavit signed by Fawcett himself, one that directly implicates you?" Her breath hitched. The firelight flickered against her pale skin. Holmes pressed on. "The timing of your son's disappearance was most convenient. If Reginald were declared legally missing, the Ashcombe estate would fall into the hands of its nearest blood relative, you. And once enough time had passed, you could have Reginald quietly disposed of, securing your control permanently." I saw the tremor in her hands. "You have no proof." Holmes reached into his coat and produced the burned fragment of Fawcett's letter. This was what he tried to destroy before he was murdered, but even in its ruined state it speaks. The truth was hidden away, but not well enough. Lady Ashcombe's mask finally shattered. Her chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. Then, before anyone could react, she lunged toward the fireplace, seizing the ornate poker from its stand. Lestrade was upon her in an instant, grabbing her wrist before she could strike. She let out a shriek, struggling against his grip, but the fight was already over. Holmes merely watched, unruffled. "A mother's love is a powerful thing," he murmured, "but so too is greed." Lady Ashcombe slumped, defeated, as Lestrade called for the constables outside. The grand illusion had collapsed. As she was led away, Holmes turned to me with a small, knowing smile. "Come, Watson, there is one last person who awaits us." And with that, we left the manor, headed toward the hidden heir who would soon learn the truth. Dawn was breaking over London as we arrived at a secluded townhouse in Hampstead, where Edmund Worth had hidden Reginald Ashcombe. The air was crisp, and the mist from the Thames was beginning to lift, revealing the city's waking streets. Holmes, ever composed, knocked firmly on the door. After a pause, it creaked open, revealing Worth, his expression weary but relieved. Without a word, he stepped aside, motioning us in. Inside, the room was dimly lit, but my eyes were immediately drawn to the figure standing by the window. A young man in his mid-20s, his posture tense, his gaze fixed on the city beyond. As we entered, he turned, and I recognized the unmistakable features of the Ashcombe lineage: sharp cheekbones, dark eyes, and an aristocratic air that had not been entirely lost despite his ordeal. Reginald Ashcombe was alive. He regarded us with suspicion. "Who are you?" Holmes stepped forward. "Mr. Ashcombe, I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. John Watson. We have come to bring you home." Reginald's brows furrowed. "Home?" He let out a bitter laugh. "I have no home. My mother saw to that." Holmes nodded. "Indeed, but your exile is over. Lady Ashcombe has been arrested for orchestrating your disappearance. The estate, your birthright, remains yours." Reginald's breath hitched. His fingers tightened around the chair he leaned against. "She did this?" Holmes's voice was gentle but firm. "Yes." A long silence stretched between us. Then, slowly, Reginald Ashcombe sank into the chair, exhaling as though releasing years of tension. "I suspected it," he murmured, "but to hear it confirmed—" He looked up at us. "Why now? Why did she turn against me?" Holmes folded his hands behind his back. "Your inheritance, Mr. Ashcombe. Your mother feared that once you came of age, her influence over the estate would diminish. Had you remained missing long enough, she could have secured permanent control." Reginald let out a quiet sigh. "I was nothing more than an obstacle." Watson, ever compassionate, stepped forward. "You are free now, Mr. Ashcombe. You can reclaim what is yours." The young man nodded slowly, as if the reality of his return was only just settling in. Then his expression hardened with determination. "Then I will." Holmes gave a satisfied nod. "Good. I have no doubt that you will restore Ashcombe Manor to its rightful dignity." As we turned to leave, Reginald called after us, "Holmes!" Holmes paused at the door. Reginald met his gaze. "Why did you take this case?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Because the truth deserves to be known." With that, we stepped into the early morning light. As we walked toward Baker Street, Lestrade clapped Holmes on the back. "Another case closed, eh, Holmes?" Holmes merely exhaled. "A case closed, yes, but justice is never so simple, Lestrade." I glanced at him. "And what of Lady Ashcombe?" Holmes shrugged. "She will face trial. Her name, once revered, will now be whispered with disgrace. But what is justice, Watson? The loss of one's empire, or the weight of knowing one has destroyed their own bloodline?" I had no answer. Holmes smiled wryly. "Come, Watson. I believe Mrs. Hudson is preparing breakfast, and I find that the unmasking of villains rather stimulates the appetite." And with that, we returned to 221B Baker Street, leaving behind yet another mystery that would soon fade into London's endless fog.